other corner when he.
Eat this one. You hear me all right? So God is good, right?
Amen.
So, Robin, I just want to say thanks again for inviting me. I don't know if you remember, the last time that I came to this group was actually with Pastor Ponder, and it was a number of years ago when we went up to Canyon Gate. Remember that, John? Sure. 3 years ago, right? So, listen, thank you very much for having me, and I have a lot to say, so I'm going to jump right into this. Thank you very much for your support. For those of you that didn't support me, I'll bring you around for the next section. I was very fortunate that this community elected me at almost 60% in the primary election. And I think that comes from 30 years of hard work in Metro and 6.5 years as the undersheriff. And what's interesting about that is as you go through a campaign, everybody seems to think that they know what I should be doing. Everybody seems to think that they could be the sheriff. Well, it's pretty miserable going through that whole election process, I'll tell you that. I don't recommend it to anybody, to be honest with you, but we got through it, and now I had this opportunity to sit back and to figure out what do I want to do, how do I want to do it, and why. And I'll tell you, the very first thing that comes up on the campaign trail is crime. It's pretty simple, right? They want to know what's going on with crime, what your ideas are, how you're going to change crime. And I'll be very candid with you. Crime has been literally beating me down since I took office. Only one category, and that's murder. As we sit here today, we have 34 homicides in our jurisdiction. I want you to think about that for a minute when I say that to you. That is on pace to have the highest number of homicides that we've ever had in our city, by far. Last year we had 148 people die in our city. We're going to sail past that if we don't get it under control. The good news is that we have reductions from 5 to 30% in every other crime category. The problem with that is however, is that when we talk about statistics, we forget the truth. And the truth is that behind every one of those 34 deaths, there are human beings. Mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, aunts and uncles, and the list goes on and on. 34 families who will never be the same because of the act of violence occurring on our streets. And by the way, that doesn't count Henderson or North Las Vegas, Mesquite, or Boulder City, or anywhere else. It's just my jurisdiction. 34 people have died on my streets. It keeps me awake every single night. And the worst part of it is that there's a lot of them that are dying that should not be dying. Should not be dying. And this is making me sort of an unpopular person with our district attorneys and our judiciary. But I have to call it out as your sheriff as I see it. And let me give you just a couple of recent examples of this. I had two guys robbed 9 banks in 20 days. The next morning, they were out of jail. 9 banks, 20 days, released from jail. It gets worse. The other night, on one of our school buses, RTC buses, there was an individual who had been released from prison for the crime of murder. Now, we had arrested a couple of days prior for assault with a deadly weapon and carrying a concealed weapon, who they released from jail with no conditions, in fact, no interview. And then we're shocked when he goes and gets on an RTC bus, again takes a knife out, violently stabs a man who's now writhing in pain on the bus on the ground, sits down, looks at him, uses some profanity and says, "Oh, you're not dead." Goes over, straddles him, and basically decapitates him. Now my homicide detectives, who've pretty much seen it all, tell me it's one of the most gruesome videos they've ever had to watch. Violent criminals do not deserve to be released from jail or prison without serious punishment. About a couple of other pieces of this, because as we sit here today, my jail has a 43% vacancy rate. 43%. We could have kept those violent felons in jail, right? The other night on Boulder Highway, 15 360, we have a man who's got a rap sheet. He's an 8-time convicted felon. A couple of days ago, my officers bought 500 fentanyl pills from him, arrested him. You know what 500 fentanyl pills would do to this room? Would kill every one of us. And probably everybody in the hotel. 500 fentanyl pills. We claim to have this war to do something about it. We're not doing anything. 500 fentanyl pills belongs in prison. This individual is a prohibited person, cannot possess a firearm. We arrested him 2 weeks even prior to the other one for drug sales. This one, he's sitting in his apartment complex in an adjacent room, and there's an African American family just next door, and a young mother is sitting there with her 2 young children, and he pulls the trigger on an AR-15 round, and the AR-15 round goes through the wall, hits one of the kids in the head, kills him, hits his brother in the leg, who has to be hospitalized, and of course flees. 8-time convicted felon with a gun, arrested multiple times with enough quantity of fentanyl to kill us all, and he's back out on my streets. That's not acceptable. I'm going to continue to call it out every time I see it. Let me give you one more example. My police officers are chasing, there's a number of individuals, because our legislator has chosen to take our felony threshold down from $1,250, from $600 up to $1,250. So I've received letters from Lowe's, Home Depot, Walgreens, the list goes on and on and on. They tell me that the rampant theft in southern Nevada is worse than it ever was in San Francisco, and they're looking at closing stores down here in southern Nevada. Because people can literally walk into a store and steal under $1,250, and there's nothing law enforcement can do about it. Nothing. The best we can do is give them a ticket. So these 3 ladies with rap sheets as wide as this room decide to walk into a store, sporting goods store, steal under $1,250, and the manager confronts them. So out comes the gun gets screwed in the manager's face. They run outside into a stolen car that they had just recently stolen and take us on a high-speed pursuit all over town. And guess where they go? Right down to Henderson's jurisdiction. But we didn't let them go. Right, we get to Sunset in Marks, and they plow into the back of a car driven by a 101-year-old man and break his neck. A World War II veteran. And his wife is 85. But that wasn't good enough. Then they get out of the car, and they run for my cops, and turn around, and the one decides she's going to point the gun at my men and women. Bad decision. Of course, we won that gun battle, and of course, they're back in jail, and now you're seeing that their bail was reduced, and now another judge says, wait a minute, let's raise this bail again. But we have to have this community conversation. You all have to have this community conversation about what do we expect about keeping violent individuals in jail. Bottom line. And I'll tell you this, I also want you to know the other side of this. The Clark County Detention Center, the jail that I run, is the largest mental health treatment facility in the state of Nevada. It is also the largest addiction treatment center in the state of Nevada and the largest homeless shelter in the state of Nevada. Jail does not fix mental health, addiction, or homelessness. Okay? We have to do something different. We can't keep expecting the police to be the only ones to deal with mental health, addiction, and homelessness. People ask me all the time, Sheriff, why are you so interested in mental health, addiction, and homelessness? I'll tell you why. Because almost every time we have to shoot somebody, mental health and addiction are almost always involved, and sometimes homelessness. I owe it to my men and women to make sure that I pay attention to the failures of these other systems and try to drive city and county and state elected officials to do something about the things that are driving crime in our community. And so as your sheriff, I'm going to continue to do that. You know, there's a couple other things I'd just like to sort of maybe get to in my speech here is that, you know, when you go around this great country of ours, and I always said this many a time, is that oftentimes law enforcement is its own worst enemy. And what I mean by that, I have some folks here that are exceptional trainers, right? And we have police officers in Minneapolis, Minnesota, kneel on the neck of George Floyd for 9.5 minutes. You're not going to find a police department anywhere in this country that trains cops to do that. You just don't train them. It's unacceptable to do it. That's murder. And you know what's so sad about that murder is? There's 18,000 police departments. We didn't do that. And a civil unrest spread across this great country of ours. And a lot of elected officials sort of encouraged that unrest. And we've protected people's First Amendment right to protest. People do not have a First Amendment right to riot. So when they moved in to riot, we changed the game. We did not allow them to burn our city down or take it over like Portland. But the sad part of that story is that we did have McMahill right out at the base of the Circus sign, where I was 30 feet away from him when he took a round, and now he's permanently paralyzed for the rest of his life, one of our police officers, because of the actions of police in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Totally unacceptable. Okay? And now we move into 2023 and we see Memphis happen. 5 police officers literally beat a man to death, Tyree Nichols. We don't teach that. Ever. It's totally unacceptable. But you know this sort of little interesting piece of racist activity that occurs is, I heard a lot of people say, well, it was black police officers on a black suspect, so who really cares? That's not acceptable. That's not what we teach. And when you look at all of these cities across our great country that I believe have failed, right, have failed dramatically, what we see is that there has not been what I call in community policing an acknowledgement of the fact that community policing is simply a buzzword today. When you pull up any one of those police departments' website, you'll see it says we're a community policing organization. I don't think most of these chiefs even have any idea what it means anymore. So the core fundamental of my community policing strategy is simply this: inject humanity into everything it is that we do. Because if you would have injected humanity in Minneapolis, George Floyd would not be dead, and McMahill would not be paralyzed. If you injected humanity in Memphis, Tyree Nichols would not be dead, and those police officers would have never gone to prison. We have a duty, an obligation, and a responsibility as law enforcement leaders to make sure our cops, our men and women that are out there every day facing what it is that they face, have a clear understanding from the top. And I expect them to treat people with dignity, respect, and humanity. That is what we do. The last piece of this that I want to just take a few minutes to talk about is a very personal thing to me. You know, many of you know that my wife was the deputy chief at Metro. Pastor Hacks, I know you worked with her. John, you worked with her. Many of you did. And she retired. We had 5 children together, 2 grandchildren now. This is our home. This is our city. And, you know, it's very interesting to me that working as your undersheriff for Joe Navarro for 6.5 years, I thought I kind of had it figured out. And when I retired because at the time Joe told me he was going to run for a 3rd term. And I thought he did a great job, so I certainly didn't want to sit around and challenge him on that. But as I retired and I went into the private sector, I've been retired for 2 years before I came back after I won the election. I went into the private sector, and quite frankly, I had sort of that dream job that every cop thinks about, right? I was making more than double what I was making in Metro. My boss lived in Alabama. The phone never rang at night or on the weekends. I had exactly 0 stress. They bought me a BMW, and I flew around on the corporate private jet. I had all operations west of Denver. And it was pretty good. I'm not going to lie to you. But I was bored within a week. Right? I'm not lying to you. I really was. I was bored. Because these men and women go out every single day and they make life and death decisions. Right? And what they do matters. Right? Cops matter, and I know that. But I also realized that, you know, as I managed the 1 October incident, from the command post that day where 58 people died on my watch, 422 people were shot on my watch with an AR-15 round, and 850 total people were injured. I have to caveat that by saying the fact that 422 people that were shot with an AR-15 round survived is an amazing testament to the police, the firefighters, the EMS, the doctors and nurses that showed up to save lives that day. But I bring that to you because what I realized when I retired was that I had PTSD. And I had never, ever really processed what I saw that day and what I felt that day. And I've been very fortunate in my life to work in the counterterrorism world. I met Mary Fetchit, who founded the Voices of 9/11. And she told me one day, she said, Kevin, she's a little old lady, she grabbed me by the hand, she says, you need to watch out for what happens to your officers and how this incident manifests themselves a year from now, 5 years from now, and even in the case of 9/11, 20 years from now. We're 5 years out, folks. I still have officers that are hurting, and hurting badly because of what happened that day. Most of you have no idea how many of my officers were shot that day. Heroes with 2 days out of the academy, taking rounds. I didn't know for 3 days how many we had shot. That's how big of an event it was. And so then as I got to thinking about this, I also realized there's this little thing called cumulative trauma. And you know, the thing about cumulative trauma is in law enforcement, we never acknowledge it. We never acknowledge that you going to the scene of a homicide time after time after time, the rape of a child, the beating of a woman. It doesn't matter what it is they see the worst of the worst of the worst. And recognize in that, as a leader, that we have a responsibility to our men and women to do something about it. No longer can it be like when Jack and I hired on back there, where we saw something that bothered us, where we were told, hold it up, put it away, and get back to work, right, Jack? That's what happened every single time. And if you showed emotion, if you showed feeling about it, you were a wimp and you were cut out of it. So now today, I've created what I call a wellness bureau at Metro. And what I know about a wellness bureau is simply this, is that most agencies around this country are talking about wellness for their first responder communities. But what they're doing is they're taking their employee assistance programs, calling it a different name by calling it wellness, and thinking that that actually serves the men and women of their agency. What I am focused in on, and I want you to hear what I'm saying to you, heart, mind, body, and soul of our first responders. And the most fascinating part about this is, you know, when you get elected sheriff, you don't make a lot of money. My salary is mandated by the state. In fact, most people at Metro above the rank of lieutenant make more money than I do. You don't take this job for the money, you take the job because you want to make a difference. And you realize the sheriff has a lot of power. And when you're given the opportunity to have a lot of power, you have to use it for the greater good. And so not only am I talking about wellness for the men and women in the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, but as I started to discuss wellness, all police, all fire, all EMS are very uniquely and keenly interested in all coming together to find a way so that we take care of our first responders in a markedly different way than we ever have. And I say, if we take care of them in a markedly different way than we ever have, here's what I know. They will take care of this community in a markedly different way than we ever have. It's a win, win, win. I promise you that. So I just want to cover a bit on faith as well. Obviously, here in this particular group, I had a conversation with my friend Ron a couple of weeks ago. I admitted something to him that I hadn't admitted in a while. That after 1 October, I sort of lost my faith. I've always been a God-fearing and God-loving man. But I stopped going to church as much as I was. And I was on the campaign trail, and I was going to churches all over this great city of ours. And you know, one of the things that you have to understand is that when I stood up here at the very beginning and said God is good, that 10, 15, 18 years ago, when we started our faith-based outreach, when we started working with pastors all around this community to come into what we called Safe Village at the time, which was a pastoral response to acts of violence in our community to try to stop retaliatory shootings. When we first started doing that, we had meetings and we weren't really allowed to talk about our Lord. And then we moved into a phase where we were including imams and all kinds of different people from all different kinds of faith. So we had to be a little bit more careful about how we were doing this. But what was really magical about all of this is that we just kept doing it. We just kept saying it. We kept talking about it because there had always been an unspoken word that as a man in uniform or a woman in uniform, you weren't supposed to be talking about God because we don't want to alienate people. Just like the sheriff is a non-political person, right? I don't know how they figured that out, but you got to be political in this job. So the truth is that God is present in all of our lives. We have to continue to let Him in. And I believe, in my heart of hearts, that the way that we really make a difference is through efforts like John Ponder, efforts like Recap, which is rebuilding every community around peace. Our pastoral response to all of these acts of violence has proven to be one of the most effective things that we've ever done. In the case of John, over 96% of the people that we put through that program never re-offend again. They become productive, tax-paying, good human beings in our community. People ask me all the time, why cops as a mentor? Well, let me tell you, don't we all deserve a second chance? I think Jesus had a second chance, right? So I think we have this opportunity to really embrace all communities in all ways and to find and let the Lord into all of our lives as we continue to move forward. And so with that, I'd be happy to pause and answer any questions you might have for me. I think Robin asked me to take a couple of questions.
Okay, I'm sure. Skip, would you like to?
Thank you for joining us today, Sheriff. My question has to do with the judges that are releasing these people back out. What can we do about that and get that whole action turned around?
So, I had this question the other day because I'm talking about this every day. People say, oh, it's all the new judges. No, it's a combination of all of them. There's a number of things that have to happen, but I'll just ask you, you're all obviously very involved in what it is that you're doing. I want you to think back to the last election. We all paid attention to who the governor was. We all paid attention to who the senators were. We all paid attention to maybe a couple of state offices. The sheriff is even below the judges. So when you got the judges, and they're probably on your ballot about between 20 and 25, is that about right? 20 and 25 judges. How many of you had done any research at all on any of those judges? I know you have. A couple of you, right? But look around the room, there's only a few of us. And so what happens is we go to the ballot and we go, oh, I like that name. Or somebody said, oh, I like this person. And these are the people that are getting elected. I'm not here to tell you that electing public defenders is bad, so don't let anybody tell you that. Some of the best judges that we have are public defenders. But we also have to look at what is the record, what is their track record in holding people accountable. And oftentimes we're electing people that are all about just let them go. Let them go, let them go. And there is this movement, I'm not going to even be quiet for 1 second about it, to decriminalize everything. There's a homeless decriminalization bill up at the legislature right now, which basically would allow the homeless to do whatever they want. Now, I argue with those individuals that think that's a good idea. The simple fact is that the way that we treat homelessness now is not acceptable either. And what's funny to me about that is that they won't come and walk with me in the tunnels or in the middle of the desert or anywhere else there's a homeless encampment because they say, leave them alone, it's okay. But let me tell you, every single day somebody's getting hurt, stabbed, oftentimes murdered, raped, robbed. Those places are not the way. If we're talking about injecting humanity into policing, how about we inject humanity in the way that it is that we treat these individuals? They're service resistant. We know that. There are models that are out there, like Vegas Stronger is a great example. 20 people a week are coming off, but can we get any funding to any of the groups that are actually making a difference? No, we want to continue to reinvent the wheel and point fingers at everybody to say, there's nothing we can do about these problems. And what I would say to you about those judges is that it's not any one judge in particular. And just recently committed an assault with a deadly weapon, carried a concealed weapon, probably needs to stay in jail until we figure out what's going on with him, so we can maybe address the mental health or addiction issues that are probably working towards having that individual do that as well. And so it's a multifaceted, and I'll tell you, there's a group we call a Criminal Justice Coordinating Council that I sit on with a number of judges and prosecutors, a number of people from the community to figure out how we can do better. And so we are working in that direction. I'm not a very patient man, I'm going to be very candid with you, so I'm pushing things a lot faster because people are dying. And you know, we have to have a sense of urgency when people are dying in our community to do something about things that are contributing to people that are dying.
Thank you.
Sheriff, in the defense for murder and DUI, manslaughter is always manslaughter, right? It's not that. So all the DUI deaths we have are not included in the murders. What can we, I forgot what the question was. Skip asked part of it, but how can we who work with a lot of people in recovery, and there's what John's doing, grab some ideas, tell us, because I think the DUI manslaughter is murder. If you're going 157 miles an hour down the street and kill someone, yeah.
I completely agree with you, and I'll tell you, while I was the undersheriff, we had a meeting with Wolfson and one of his principals. We brought him in there, and we had a very egregious case where the individual had a 0.28 blood alcohol content, got behind the wheel of a car, drove. We actually charged an individual with murder for a DUI manslaughter case. The case made it all the way up to the Supreme Court of our state and was struck down. So as we sit here today, there is a bill being introduced by Assemblyman Burek, I believe, out of Henderson, who is looking to increase the maximum penalty for DUI manslaughter up to 20 years. So what I would say to you about that is I still think it's a little bit of a baby step, but look, I mean, the truth is the vast majority of people that commit murder in our jurisdiction are spending less than 10 years behind bars. So we've got a responsibility to make sure that we as citizens continue to press on those elected officials to do something different. We have to do it.
Anybody else?
Hello, Sheriff McMahill.
Hi.
My name's Tom Williams.
Hi, Tom. I remember you.
How are you?
I'm all right.
I'm not going to ask you hard questions.
I don't care if you do.
All right, well, I already emailed it to your office, so if you've seen it already,
I haven't seen your question yet. I saw your Facebook, or not your Facebook, your Instagram post.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks for following.
I'm not following you, I just saw it.
The Sheriff's Department in Los Angeles has been infiltrated by 4 dangerous gangs. I'm in favor of decriminalization, but I'm not in favor of recriminalization or criminalization of the Sheriff's Department. And I don't know what plans you have or what you might be currently doing to address that situation.
Yeah, that's a good question, Tom. So what's interesting, you said 4 gangs in LA. Actually, the documents that I've recently read are far more than 4 gangs. In fact, they started out as kind of like fraternity groups where, you know, you hung out with me, you were with Robert Luna, who is now the LA County Sheriff, previously the Chief of Police in Long Beach. And so he and I have had some conversations about what he is doing to eradicate that within his jail. As I sit here, I don't know of an identified gang that I have in my correctional facility, but I would also be naive to tell you that I don't have one. It has not come to the surface yet. There are a number of people in my organization that have tattoos that are questionable at best. And so that is part of the reason why I don't allow officers to have tattoos that are visible. So you can't have them. So an individual that is sleeved up, they have to wear a long sleeve like I'm wearing. They can't have them on their necks. They can't have them on their hands. All of those kinds of things. And so we have some things that we are working on as we speak, Tom, but I'm not going to give too much detail about what that is, but I'm acutely aware of the issue of gangs within the correctional facilities in our country, not just LA County, by the way. And so, and by the way, Tom's a candidate for the next 26, I think I said, right? Yeah, so we've had a couple conversations. Good guy.
Sheriff, I'm not a candidate for anything, but
You're the shortest guy in the room.
I have that already. So I would like to know what your plans are for community policing. When I was a kid, we knew who was the people in our area. We knew by name, we knew by phone number, we knew who to call if we had an issue. Granted, it was a relatively small town compared to Las Vegas, but at the same time, I think those kind of plans are necessary in today's world, and I'd like to throw my hat in that. Being a photographer, if you have something community-oriented that you like in the news and on the news, I have some pretty good contacts, and I'd be willing to participate in that in a way that would make you guys look like you're really doing something with that kind of arena.
Well, if you can get something on the news that we're doing right, I would appreciate it. Hispanic or African American part of our town may be radically different than what actually works in the enterprise part of our town, where we have a much higher population of Indians. Just two very different examples. So we do things like coffee with the cop, right? I'm sure many of you have seen those, where we go to a coffee place, we sit down, invite the community to come in. So what they did in Northeast, because it was a limited language speaking area that they were in, they did aguas frescas with the cop, which is it's like a juice that you'll go into a Hispanic restaurant and you'll see, pina, horchata, I forget all the names of them. They're good if you haven't had them. Hibiscus, try it all, it's good stuff. But allowing those individuals to develop unique and specific community-based programming to each of the area commands is what has really worked for us. In fact, let me give you just this example of the Bolden Area Command where I was the captain in 2010. I didn't get a single additional officer from Sheriff Gillespie. When I took over West Las Vegas Bolden Area Command, it was the worst in the entire city. Okay, identified as the African American part of town. We had the highest shootings, the highest gangs, the highest robberies, the highest everything, highest homicides, everything. A year later, because we engaged community authentically. When you engage community authentically, you develop relationships, and out of relationships comes trust. Okay? A year later, we were able to reduce our crime by 40%. But let me tell you something even more amazing about that story. And that is that the difference of what has happened in the Bolden Area Command is, rather than new captains kind of trying to come in and reinvent the wheel every time and put their own stamp on it, they continued what worked. So guess where the only area command is today that I don't have a homicide in? West Las Vegas, Bolden Area Command, the Black Car Town, right? You don't see that in Rosé. You don't see them talking about. The fact is that the safest area command in our city is Bolden Area Command. They don't talk about that, right? And so we still have to talk about things like institutional racism in media also, because they don't want to report the truth. Do you know that we went a single year without having an officer-involved shooting in West Las Vegas? We also went that same year without having a single homicide. Jack, did that ever happen while you were working for us? Never, right? I'm really proud of the work that they're doing. That work takes a lot of time and effort and energy, and what I'll say to you, sir, is I've taken over an agency that I'm 300 budgeted unfilled positions now. I have to recruit. So when you asked earlier about anybody want to stand up and say, hey, we're hired, we're hired. Okay? 300 police officers, corrections officers, and more importantly, I have a communication center that you can't get through on 311 unless you wait about an hour and a half. And the reason for that is it's staffed at 50% of what it's supposed to be staffed at. So I'm hiring 911 operators, dispatchers, police officers, and correction officers. come one, come all, we'll see how we can get you hired.
Sorry,
We got Jeff over here.
Jeff.
First of all, I can't tell you how important it is that you come out and have these kinds of conversations. In addition, us being able to do to hire more, have more people want to have a career in law enforcement.
Well, I think a lot of it, that's a great question, Jeff. I think a lot of it really came out of both the George Floyd incident and the Tyree Nichols incident. I think there was this sort of national mood, the cops were bad. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, the Henderson Police Department, we're not any of those agencies. And I want to be clear about something. I'm not standing before you telling you that we don't have our flaws, because we do. Without a doubt, we have our flaws. But as a learning organization, we try never to make the same mistake twice. I think one of the greatest ways is to demonstrate your appreciation of the men and women that are wearing a uniform out there. I think that goes a long way. But I'll also tell you this, I believe, and we know this from Henderson as well, I believe that if they don't believe in their leaders, they're never going to ask people to come and work at that police department. The best recruiters are my men and women. They're the ones that say, hey, I love working here, I love the direction we're going, I love what this police department does, I love what it represents, I love what it stands for. They are the ones that get the people to come to our organizations. And so I'm working very hard to let them know how much I give a darn about them, how much I care about them. And as you know, I've been doing that with the Henderson Police Department as well. And so we'll continue to do that. And look, I also think we also have to be honest about a couple things. And you know, when we look at our hiring practices, the hiring practices that we have today are the same ones that I hired on. We have a culture in our hiring process to get people out rather than to get them in. And look at something like marijuana as an example, right? There actually is we disqualify people for recency and frequency. So how long ago you used it and how many times you used it. So if you know somebody at Metro that said, don't tell me to use it more than 25 times, she used it 26 times, but she didn't have the friends. So you can be made for marijuana as you can make for alcohol. Right. That technically, you can use marijuana up to the day that you get hired. I can still make it a condition of employment to smoke marijuana so you can't smoke it. And by the way, there is a bill at the legislature that they're introducing to try to let cops smoke marijuana. That's not acceptable. You can't have a high cop out there on the streets with the ability to take somebody's life. You can't do it. Okay, so this is how far we've gotten away from common sense. We have to drag it back to reality. And as long as I'm your sheriff, I'll always make it a condition of employment. You can't smoke marijuana while you're Metro. I just said one last thing. So thank you all for coming, but I also, if you would help me give a round of applause to the men and women of law enforcement.
I'm going to have Sammy close us out here.